Thank you very much, Aaron. Welcome everyone for this great discussion around claims. The question we have today is how to build an optimized claims journey for customer experience. And so it's going to be 40 minutes around discussing that. And please use the Brella app. I know you probably have used it brilliantly before, so we are going to continue. We're going to use the 10 last minutes to really get your questions and have this great panel to answer them. So it feels really good to talk about claims and to represent the claims teams, I must say, and I'm sure our panelists agree with me. In our industry, it's really a lot about data for pricing, for underwriting, how to price the right, to have the right prices for the risks, but there's actually quite limited inputs around what really makes our industry realize the promise it has and turn it into a real experience. So it's really interesting for us to bring that perspective to life, and also to make sure that the claims teams can share with you here how they do that in their day-to-day work. So I have two great speakers here with me today. We started to have quite a good discussion earlier, not a lot about claims, but a lot about different things, and so I'm really keen to hear from them about claims. So maybe we can start with you, Claire, to share about your experience and your background.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. So my name's Claire Charlton. I'm the head of household claims at Admiral. I've actually worked in the claims space for about 20 years, mostly motor, but the last 2.5 years in household, and it's a bit of a baptism of fire, pardon the pun. I'm interested to talk with Rich and Oriane about our thoughts on what an optimised claims journey looks like, although I'm conscious that we're the customer, right, and we need digital providers to help us optimise. So I'm not sure we're the right people, really, to talk about it. We'll say what we want, I guess.
Great.
Yeah, cool. Well, good afternoon. Sorry to those of you on the left. I've got a thing blocking me, but I recognise you're there. So my name's Rich Boyd. I look after the claims workstream in Lloyd's digital transformation program that we refer to as Blueprint 2 and the future at Lloyd's. So I'm a bit of an insurance outsider, so confession, I've actually only been in the sector about 18 months now. So my background's more on product and technology development. I've worked in consulting from the moment I arrived in the UK 4 years ago for British Airways and Lloyd's Banking Group. So if you felt like that was a baptism of fire, mine was, I can empathise. But I've really come to fall in love with claims in terms of, I suppose, it's the moment what we do as a sector comes to life, right? And the more you face off and speak to the insured around their experiences, you come to realise just what an incredible impact a great claims journey can have on people's lives. And I think that gets lost sometimes in the insurance conversation, and especially when we're getting really excited about all those premiums rolling in, we sometimes forget that we've got to make sure the money's going the other way so that we live up to the value proposition that we've sold.
Great start. So, first I'd like to hear from you. Basically, what are your kind of customers you have, and what type of business you're covering in a little bit more detail, so that we can a bit like set the scene for everyone, so that then we can go into more details, maybe.
Sure, yeah. So for Admiral home customers, of course, the digital claims journey particularly comes to life in times of surge, where you're never really going to have enough people to answer all those calls. It also comes to life because it can give them a lot of information to sort of self-service and really understand the product that they bought 8 months ago and never thought they'd use and never read, which again is very hard to do on some sort of telephony IVR or for a handler to explain. And I think the nature of the different perils that we have within the home insurance space means that, there are sort of 15 different types of claim, and that's before you've even considered the types of event and the severity and the cover levels. So there's a lot of complexity that customers don't really realise when they first buy a home product. I'm learning. I didn't realise that when I agreed to move to home. But I think what we're finding, and we'll probably talk about, is that having information that customers can interact with digitally, not just to register a claim actually, but to understand what they can claim for and how, is far superior than anything a handler could give. And actually resource for handlers in certain moments of surge. So that, in my experience, is the context at which I'm in this conversation today.
Mm-hmm.
So Lloyd's is a marketplace, and so technically our customers are really our managing agents and our syndicates. And so the real focus of the program of what we've been doing is setting the technology environment through which they can facilitate their claims in a syndicated environment. And so really trying to make sure that the end insured relationship with their underwriters can be facilitated in a fast way, and that technology and process within the marketplace itself isn't holding things up. And I suppose there's two key segments for us, and we refer to delegated authority, which is our outsourced business, huge amount of North American property, and that for me is real low-hanging fruit for what technology can drive change in terms of the fact that it is high volume and comparatively low value. So ideally, that's the stuff that's moving quickly, and the whole claims handling process is outsourced, so it's happened already by the time the information hits London. So anything we can do to get out of the way of slowing that down is ideal, and making sure that those that are out in the field dealing with the claims have access to the right information, and most importantly, the right funds to make sure claims are paid quickly. And then we've got the complicated stuff that's written directly in London, and this is where the syndicated and subscription market really comes to the fore, where we're dealing with really big, complicated stuff, and that becomes less about, potentially less about speed of money, and really about making sure that we've done a really good job of making sure that all parties involved are comfortable with what's being proposed from a settlement perspective, from a coverage checking perspective, and that, you know, things that have agreements that are entered into in good faith, but are ultimately in areas that can be a bit vague and ambiguous at times, we've come to the right outcome for everyone concerned.
Well, great. We're hearing from what you're saying, the different types of claims, the complexity of accessing this information, this customer, different types of customers. Could you elaborate a little bit more on what your customers' needs are? So how those needs have evolved, what are the expectations that they have based on where they stand and so on. So maybe Rich to change?
Sure,
change
we'll change the order. All right. So I think the area that I find most interesting is really the outsourced model. So normally this is where retail claims are the closest to us there. And what you see with customers, especially when we're dealing with North American property, a lot of the time it's when a catastrophe's happened. You've had a huge weather event come through the US, like Hurricane Ian. And so for most people, you're staring down the barrel of, you know, you've lost your house. You have no idea when you're going to get working again. So you know your cash flow is about to take a massive impact. And the most important thing to you in that moment is cash. You need money on hand quickly so that you can get going. And for some people, that means they've got maybe 24 hours before they're in trouble. And so for those types of customers, we need to make sure that they've got access to capital quickly. And for us, it's about how do we shrink that life cycle so that we can have confidence in terms of paying claims. The US market brings with it challenges around paying quickly in terms of liability, basically setting a precedent that we are accepting the liability. So there's challenges around that, but we need to recognise that and find a way forward, because otherwise you're going to have people who are homeless and struggling and their insurer is not coming to the table. So that's been one key part of it. And I think the second thing that I find interesting is when it comes to people's expectations around claims is that it's no longer being informed by insurance. And so I think what technology has done across multiple sectors is it's lifted the bar in terms of customer service. So if you look at what's happened in banking and you look at what's happened in the retail sector, you look at what Amazon's done with e-commerce in terms of online returns, the expectations everywhere have been going up and up and up. And so I think if a customer comes into a really antiquated claims experience and they're used to in other sectors getting really good customer experiences, you're going to have a problem. And so even if we look around and go, well, we're actually better compared to our peers, that might not necessarily be the right benchmark to be using, when in actual fact we might want to be looking more broadly and go, is this customer interacting with these types of brands, and if so, what would those brands' expectations be creating, and therefore how do we lift even further to go after those?
Yeah, so what I hear from you is speed, is comparison with other industries, and the fact that actually the insurance industry may not be the best example, and we need to challenge ourselves in that, so it's good. What about you, Claire?
It's probably first useful to acknowledge you used Amazon and banking as the bar that customers follow. I'm thinking more Netflix and Domino's, but probably says more about me. But I think customers their expectation has been, we've all used to Spotify, knowing what tunes we want to listen to, watching the delivery bar track and your pizzas in the oven and that kind of stuff. And I genuinely think that that is something that we should get to for customers with their claims, for example, being able to understand what phase their claim is at a certain point. Of course, the difficulty is that you don't want to give too much information. The information might not be accurate, that somebody's put on the file. So there's lots of complexity within that. But I think in context of expectation, I think an optimised claims journey is probably not just a digital journey. I think that's and I don't think customers necessarily know what they want until the claim happens. And we find there are a lot of customers who might complete an online notification, and we have a very high percentage, over half of all of our claims are registered online. So our customers have a very strong appetite for it. But equally, they sometimes also follow up with a call because they're looking for some assurance depending on the nature of the peril. Or whilst they can report their claim, actually what we're focusing on now is for them to actually start their claim. Yeah, they don't want to just be given a reference number and wait for something to happen. They want to know that their claim's validated. They want to know when their supplier's coming out and can they make an appointment. Or a focus for us is they want to be put straight through to settle their contents-only claim with a provider who's going to replace their washing machine or give them cash. And it's all done by them without us. And there's great efficiency for us, right? It's not just about the customer experience. There's a lot of savings and ability to scale and grow much faster without that human dependency. But I think customers, they don't always know what they want. I don't know if that's fair, but...
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. So you're raising here two other interesting points on the transparency, claim status, knowing where we are on the journey, and sometimes it could be better than just speed, right? You may want to actually make sure that you know where we stand, even though it's going to be long. At least you know. And you're bringing also this important thing that we're going to expand on, which is the combination between human touch and of course digitalization, and how do you combine those two? When do customers want one versus the other? Have you, based on your experience with customers, the data you've been able to gather, did you identify specific things going beyond that? I mean, on the same idea, when do they really need some support over the phone? When do you need the claims handler to pick up the phone? And what is bringing compared to a technology-oriented solution?
Yeah, so I think customers are fairly aligned in their own understanding of what's complex and not, generally. So if I've lost my iWatch, they don't expect to necessarily have to go through a lot of rigmarole. Obviously, they would appreciate we need to do certain checks and register the claim, but they probably would have an expectation it should be quick and simple. If they've had a large escape of water, they feel that it's complex and need extra care and wouldn't feel satisfied with a digital journey. So there's a balance there. I think that doesn't mean there aren't elements that the customer wants the benefit of efficiency and speed, but they also, that's the point I was making earlier, they really want a bit of both. Mm-hmm. They want to be able to tell you about it digitally. They want to be able to talk to you over message or web chat. They don't want to have to hold on a phone line, but they do want to maybe ask questions, seek reassurance. They want to know what's happening next. And it's very hard to anticipate all that information digitally for a complex claim because there are many variables, and you don't really know what the next action is until the one before. So I think we're learning. I think we know. So contents only, I talked about earlier, so an obvious example. We think customers just want to get on and settle it. But for more complex perils, escape of water, that kind of thing, I think they want that reassurance and they want to know what's going to happen next, and it's very hard for us to push that information digitally, certainly where we are at the moment. Mm-hmm.
On complex claims, maybe, Rich? You wanna? I guess you've seen a lot of them in the commercial lines industry.
There was a great story that came through from one of our claims team on the oversight side, and there was a family in the US, and they had during the birth of their son, something had gone wrong in the procedure, and he was born with brain damage, and so they'd cared for him most of their life, but they realised that they were aging, and we're not going to be able to care for this kid much longer, we're not going to be around much longer, we need to start thinking about the future. And so they went back to the hospital, they took them to court, and were trying to sue essentially for damages because of what had happened. And so the hospital was able to piece together that they had a policy that was underwritten through Lloyd's for liability for this very event, but they didn't have the full policy breakdown. And what was incredible was hearing how we were able to pull together the relevant syndicates from that time period that would have been underwriting it and come to an agreement with them to settle that claim. And so what was remarkable was seeing that even in the face of a really complicated claim, we saw the good of the sector come forward rather than hiding behind the fact that we didn't necessarily have all the policy documents and we didn't have incredibly accurate proportions across who's liable. We got the right folks around the table and they were able to come to an agreement, and that's had a long-term impact for this family, which was quite cool. And I think the key insight for me there is the role of people still exists. And I think we're so focused on technology and automation, and I think that's excellent, but we can't lose sight of the value of relationships that go on in these business transactions with our customers. And so for me, the bit of tech that's exciting is how do we use technology to enable humans to be better humans and take the grunt work off their desk. So if you've got people in your team that are simply shuffling Excel files around, that's a great example of someone who has all this potential to be doing far better work that's tied up in grunty admin that hopefully technology can resolve so that they can do more valuable and more interesting work in the long run.
Great. Yeah, no, this totally resonates with me on the AXA Excel side. And again, copy and pasting, is it the best use of your claims handler's time? Do you want them to do that versus to talk to clients and brokers and make sure that actually they bring their expertise directly to who is really needing it? So great insights. Along those lines, what do you think that technologies and market entrants have brought to insurers? How have they been challenged or being helped through this optimization of the customer journeys? Claire?
I think the sort of evolution in the data science area and how that's brought to life our ability through analytics to do a lot of things that we might previously had needed people to do is a focus. So, for example, trying to build in your automated fraud analysis within an online journey so you can validate the claim without a human at the time, in real time, underwriting, that allows us to build straight through processing, right? If we can't do, no pressure to the IT guys from Admiral in the room who are looking up, but if you can't do real-time fraud analytics and real-time underwriting, you can't do straight through processing. It's quite simple. So, we know what we want, and fortunately the technology is getting there. I still think there's more that can be done. There's talk today about chatbots, and they've been around for a while. I think I interact with sort of from a retail sector as a customer. There are some good ones out there, right? And there are some bad ones, and they, ask you a few questions first, and knowing when to say, okay, I'm going to connect you to an agent now. Some really get it right, and I think there's still more to learn there. My not advice or request, I suppose, for providers is try and provide products to insurers and your customers that are truly flexible. Because, just the nature of a claim we've just talked about, not one size fits all, let alone providers. Our businesses are incredibly different. So I think sometimes I think providers of technology are very good at sort of one element, and when you need to deviate, you have to do a lot of that work yourself. Because you're out of the box, it's just you're out of the box. So something flexible out of the box would be my request.
Great.
So when I first joined Lloyd's and they were explaining to me how we ran our delegated authority business, my jaw hit the floor, because it was at that point in time that I realised that we had billions of pounds of money moving and it was controlled through Excel spreadsheets, and somehow auditors across the globe kept signing this off. So everything that I knew and believed in business was suddenly a mirage. So I think for me the bar has felt incredibly low for us in terms of where we're at, and I think what's exciting and terrifying all at once is that there's all these great InsurTechs that keep coming through. We've got conferences like this, we've got the Lloyd's Lab where we're having cohort after cohort, and the Distribind team that's here, they're doing some great stuff in the binder space, in the bordereau space, and hopefully you can meet with Dave Connors and his team, because if you play in that space, they're doing some cool things. But we've just got to get our plumbing right at the moment. We've got to do the really boring infrastructure bit so that where we are as a marketplace is just ready to start to drive change, if that makes sense. So at the moment, the kit that we're running on is decades old, and so we're moving through the Future at Lloyd's program to being on modern cloud-based infrastructure. People will connect and move data around through APIs rather than spreadsheets. Information will start to move between carriers in near real time rather rather than overnight XML files. And so as a result, this kind of step forward into what I would say is the not even gold standard, the minimum standard of what you would expect of technology now. I'm expecting from kind of 2025, once that's fully rolled out and people are adopting it, then we'll start to see the innovation, because we've got the data moving in a standardized way. It can be connected in. We can start introducing sandbox environments for startups to come and play in. And I'm hoping that's when we'll really start to see the value of this stuff come to life, at least for us in the old world.
Yeah, I think the whole kind of API plug and play is, we love the idea of it, right? At the minute, it's obviously, we're all moving into that world and you're learning new things all the time, so there's significant appetite, but there's not a huge amount of practice. But yeah, it would be nice to imagine, wouldn't it, in sort of 5 years' time, that we really are plugging and playing, and you know, going live with something is much quicker, it's much more standardized in terms of your outcomes. But yeah, I mean, it's for sure an enabler. I think everybody, that's why we're here, right?
Yeah, I guess in the room a lot of people are definitely trying to help us to basically go further on that direction. Going back to what you said on Excel spreadsheets, we were talking earlier about the fact that indeed it's quite flabbergasting. It's crazy to think about how we actually use our claims data, which is supposed to be our insurers' key asset, and that we don't nurture it as much as we could, and actually our customers are really thinking that we are. So we need to bridge this gap between what we're actually doing with it and how we are interacting with the ecosystem and with our customers on it. So
I think it's quite challenging though, because most insurers will need to interact with a supply chain that are not large businesses who are not going to necessarily have the money to invest in order to maybe integrate, or in order to not use a spreadsheet. And actually some of those businesses are your most valuable, because they might be really niche, or they might be providing expertise and a quality of customer service that, you know, you just can't replicate. So I think there's always going to be a challenge. I mean, you know, from a property perspective, you know, we're relying on asbestos testers and drying restoration firms. You know, some of these are very small businesses. You know, we want them to come onto a centralized platform so we can see where claims are in this sort of dominoes tracker. But realistically, are we going to expect them to spend the money to integrate? No. But then how do we give customers this oversight if one part of the supply chain can't fulfill it? So it's really challenging, because you also, you know, a lot of these businesses have gone out of business over the last 1 or 2 years, and Brexit and a light for labour force. They don't have spare cash to do this. So it is challenging to do it right across the supply chain. No matter how good the insurer is, does that make sense? Or the tech companies.
Mm-hmm. Is there anything that you want to add on how your companies are basically trying to optimize this customer journey experience at the time of claims? Is there something that you're thinking, okay, this is exactly what we need to do? So you mentioned the getting the foundations right. We have a sense of what is needed to get to this position and to progress. Is there anything else that you think that is really needed? I would think about, for instance, how we manage our teams, how we lead them to this change. Is there anything you want to share around these elements, for instance, or others, Rich and Claire?
Well, I think I'm going to steal from our conversation at lunch, where you were talking about how you've empowered your team, your claims operations teams, with metrics so that they can understand what's going on. And I think one of the things that keeps coming up over and over again is it's really easy to have a technology change program happen to people. It's a whole nother ballgame to have it happen with people. And I think the idea of starting the process by at least helping teams who are doing this day in, day out now just understand the impact of their work, so that at the very least you can get them thinking about it. Because ultimately all that will end up happening is, if they're not the ones driving it, you'll end up spending a lot of time paying third parties, or maybe some business analysts that you've already got on the pitch, to come in and try and understand how they work and come up with ideas, when actually we've got a wealth of knowledge and talent there. How do we actually unpack that and really empower those ideas to come from them? Because I think that's when you'll actually start to see even cooler innovation. If you can help them start coming forward with ideas or improvement, combine them with some people who can put that in the right technical language, I think then you're in for a really interesting conversation.
Yeah, I would echo that. I was in the product demo earlier, and lots of dashboards, lots of sort of aggregating data and trying to highlight risk and try and tell you about customers, intent or the cause of failure demand. But actually, an exercise, we try and involve, frontline handlers in lots of things we do. But most recently, we were trying to understand why customers were calling, but their claims weren't proceeding. Why were so many customers calling? What we thought, it's escape of water claims, they're really complex, they've got high excess and they don't realise. Well, it actually yes, that was an element, of course, but it turned out there was a very niche point that customers weren't understanding, that we weren't seeing in our data, but just some kind of forums with a group of 10 handlers, 1 hour later, it was very clear. And then we can build that into, for example, online, what information we need to educate customers before they claim, or pre-null as I call it, to ask themselves, what am I claiming for? Take them to the part of the policy, check their excess before then pressing make a claim or ringing, because it's a waste of the customer's time. It's a registered claim for the insurer. So I think you're right, you use data, and there's lots of really good solutions that have been talked about today, and speech analytics and text and all of that kind of stuff. But actually, we've got some really valuable people working in the business who are speaking to our customers every day. So, and that there's still more to do, I think.
Yeah, it's about making sure that we help them to spend their time doing that, and they love doing that, like the expertise, the interaction, being there on the market and showing how knowledgeable they are about claims and how they can support and being empathetic. And actually, yeah, there's much more we could do, but let's make sure we don't leave them on the side and bring them along to bring them those dashboards. That is not just a fancy data tool, but it's actually something they will use, and that they will feel comfortable they own their claims portfolio, beyond the claim-by-claim approach that they of course have and have had for a long time. So maybe last question before we get into the few questions we got from the audience. How can the different types of technologies, so AI, so you mentioned chatbots earlier, but AI, analytics, RPA and others, how those different types have been helpful for you in optimizing the claims journeys? From your perspective, what do you want to share?
I think even just basic automation of payments through Bordereau is something that I think a lot of businesses, not just insurers, have probably done for a long time. And being able to make a payment, settle a claim, one, it's great for the supplier and for their cash flow, because it's very important to not rely on processing of a claim at an individual level. But I think, completing non-value added tasks, I think there's been a lot of discussion about that today. We have a number of those processes live. And so, kind of just your automation team, there's probably loads more we could do. There's loads more we want to do, but there's actually huge value that you just get from having robots or PCs in the cloud doing some of these non-value added tasks, particularly, I'm guessing. I mean, we don't really have a great deal of legacy system from a case handling system in Admiral, because we're quite a new insurer in all 30 years this year. But for Lloyd's and for many other businesses, there's you have an infinite number of legacy systems. So I'm guessing automation might be an absolute saviour. I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the low-hanging fruit continues to be just simplifying processes and automating where possible, and APIs drive a huge part of that. So being able to connect up the ecosystem like we were describing. I think the best example we've got of that has been the work we've done with Vitesse around what we describe as our faster claims payments process. So rather than the traditional model whereby a loss fund is held by a third-party administrator on behalf of the London syndicates, that money is now held back in London, and those that are in the field processing the claims can just log into the Vitesse platform. They know exactly which account to pay the money from. It draws down the money based on the relevant splits, and we top up the money that it's being drawn down from on a weekly basis rather than monthly basis. And that whole re-engineered process has completely transformed the cash flow model, which has meant that at no point in time should the insured ever be unable to be paid because the money hadn't been topped up from London because of delays in bordereau processing or whatever. So sometimes it's not even a really complicated API-driven crazy world. It's simply just looking at the processes and going, right, when we defined this, we only had Excel and we only had bank accounts in every single country. So now we've actually got access to a whole bunch of other technology. How can we re-engineer it? And so, just taking those steps back has been really helpful. But of course, ChatGPT is coming. There's lots of opportunities there.
It's out of date, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm sure it'll be, by the time the conference is over, it'll be onto a new thing. No, one of the more interesting ones I've seen on the placement side, and I appreciate this is a claims specific session, was looking at the logic around what we describe as a core data record, which is used for a digital risk record in the London market going forward. Because you've got a really clear logic chain with that, there's actually a really nice way that you could translate that into a chatbot environment, and you could start turning that into a back and forth interaction for an underwriter rather than doing it through a Word document. So I think even just moving into an environment where we're having back and forth interactions for data capture, then dumping it into a document, a PowerPoint, a spreadsheet, I think will probably be the next big transformation in terms of just how we operate internally.
Great. Very interesting, of course, on ChatGPT. We have one question on the challenges that we're facing. So how do you think technology will resolve some of those challenges we're facing? So you shared about the opportunities just recently. Is there anything you want to add on the challenges that technologies can support?
I think they can support challenges, but they can be challenges in themselves because they cost a lot of money. And everybody's trying to not spend a lot of money, particularly if you're in the claims world, because of motor inflation, inflation of building materials, and I'm sure any other area of insurance. So, but I think broadly it's enabling us to allow customers to self-serve. If I was to pick one thing, where they choose to, that's important. I don't think Admiral will probably regret to say this, but I can't imagine that Admiral level say, we're digital only. I think we very much want to support customers' engagement in the way they want to, but I think enabling self-service for the appetite for an individual customer for a non-complex claim is certainly a challenge that we're actively trying to overcome with the support of technology providers. So it's making a big difference.
I think technology is also helping us see other challenges, right? So the parametric insurance space I find absolutely fascinating, and I think when you start to see what that can then do for the claims journey, because we then start talking about absolutely binary scenarios where we can immediately trigger claims payment, like that feels to me like a nirvana worth going after. And I think there's the stuff that the guys at Flood Flash have done in terms of their lovely poles that they've got on the sides of building, and if the water rises above this level, you've got money in your account before you even realise you've been flooded. I think these are really great, and I don't want to diminish it, but I really hope that becomes the new normal for how we're starting to underwrite. So I think there's so much data we must have on the underwriting side now that we should be able to tighten our wordings, try and get more binary where possible, so that we can enable this digital self-service kind of environment, so that we can actually start saying, you know what, we know that 9 times out of 10 when someone's lost their watch, this is what's going to happen. So let's just fully automate that, and we've got to make sure that that's actually happened on the underwriting side as well. It's not just a claims problem to solve it. That starts at that policy wording level.
Yeah, and I think from a pricing perspective, obviously, new data sets are emerging all the time, largely driven by technology, and that informs you to better or more accurately assess and price your risk compared to your risk. Yours is probably greater. But, it allows you to use that data that's fulfilled by technology to ensure that you're pricing more accurately and, as you say, informing and preempting what the outcome of the claim might be, or even when the claim might happen. And in turn support customers.
Interestingly, there's a question around a world without claims, I guess claims teams, integration with supplier data so that payments are instant or simply don't happen based on data associated with an event. So what are your thoughts on it? So you mentioned parametrics. Of course, this can be helpful. What is your view overall on a world without claims, and I have an idea.
So I think as much as the parametric piece excites me, in a world where we can do that, I think is where we need to be going. I think that is where we continue to find the simple complex, right? So I think where you have got something that's as binary as my house soaking wet or not, and we can find a way of using sensors to track that and trigger payments, fantastic. But there's always going to be the grey. Like insurance will have grey components, and so I think that's where the people side of it is fantastic. And even in the claims adjusting space, seeing some of the desk-based surveying you can now do, where you start triggering drones in certain areas to do flyovers, or there was a InsurTech, and I was talking to in New Zealand, that's playing around with computer vision in building sites, and so they're doing constantly like reassessing building sites as they develop, so that there's a rich history of 3D modelling in the building, so that in the event that there is an issue with the building, they've got this beautiful history of visuals, and so then you throw some AI over the top of that, and you can start automatically calculating that. But to even just facilitate and enable that to happen, someone's got to sit there and go, right, for this policy, we're going to get those guys involved, and then we're going to make sure the AI people have the access. So I think there'll always be a role. It's just trying to figure out what the right role and what the right value add is of those human claims handling interactions.
Yeah, and expanding on this, I mean, claims management is a small project management in itself, so you have to coordinate with multiple stakeholders, especially on commercial lines, but given the size of the claims and so on, so that there will be, even if you have more data, satellite imagery is a good example, you'll need people to take actions, and the decision making is the exciting point for our claims teams. They remain the ones that decide if and how much we pay in claims. So this is really important to have gatekeeping. I mean, we talked about ChatGPT, but there's others where actually the value will not come from actually like identifying information, looking at several 30-page reports or whatever, but it's really about defining and communicating the amounts that will be settled. So I think it's really important to remind the group that indeed there will be a trigger, and an important one. Well, the contrasts in the industry are never black or white to some degree. Probably in the retail side are better, but when you have gray areas, you have to kind of have someone to take a stance and say, well, this is what's going to happen for our senior management, but also for the external folks, of course.
And this might sound really negative, but if you've got a claim that's gone to litigation, you really don't want to be sitting in front of the judge trying to justify a decision because computer said no. You really want to be able to sit there and say, well, based on the information that was gathered, these were the decisions we took, and I think there will always be that need because of that.
Yeah, and looking at the clock counting down, it would be remiss of us not to mention the increasing regulatory expectation around good outcomes and qualifying that a customer's understood. By the way, if anybody knows what good outcomes means, if someone could send the information to Oriane, that'd be amazing. But no, I'm joking, obviously. But I think it's going to be very hard to define and get assurance from a digital decision unless you're absolutely sure, particularly if you're declining claims as well. Because, of course, if you want to do straight-through processing, you need to decline as well as accept. So there's a large burden on us, as there should be, by the way, because customers have paid for a product. But I think it's only going to become more complex after July the 31st, and we'll continue learning. And that's before we've even mentioned vulnerable customers, so we won't mention those.
Great. I think we're almost out of time. That was great to have you and both to share about claims. So the question of building an optimized claims journey hopefully is clearer for everyone. We had great insights around technology, but also, of course, human interactions and the value of claims teams. And I guess we're all convinced and passionate about what claims team can bring. Will bring in the future even more, and I hope that you'll take away to all of your different companies the really important potential that we can make as an industry if we put that and optimize it even further. So thank you very much to everyone for listening, and thank you to our two great panelists, Claire and Rich.
Thank you very much.